So thank you very much. We will go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Tim Richardson, Program Director for Journalism and Disinformation at PEN America, and we know it's a very busy time, so we're very happy that you are here and could join us. So during the next hour or so, we're going to share our findings from our work to counter disinformation at the community level. I'm excited for today's discussion and very grateful to Kurt Samsel, Henry Hicks, Maritza Felix, and Michelle Beaver for sharing their insights. We think their work is proof that when communities come together, they can push back against disinformation and strengthen the foundations of truth and democracy. And with that, I am going to hand it over to John Friedman, PEN America's Managing Director for U.S. Free Expression Programs. John?
Thanks, Tim, and just echoing your thanks to everyone for being here and to the team behind this effort. I'm really excited for the opportunity today for us all to hear from you about this work and just the incredible impact that we've been able to have at a very local level, but by working smartly with a number of partners, some of whom are here to talk about that as well today. So. I think the importance of this moment is one that can't be lost on any of us. And what I want to emphasize is, that disinformation is a massive challenge. This is, one effort to hit at that global challenge in a very local and regionally focused way, but it's one that reflects a lot of deliberation by many people in the field and here at PEN America about where we could have a tangible impact. For those who don't know about PEN, we are a 100-year-old free expression and literary organization, and our mission is to celebrate creative expression and defend the civil liberties that make it possible. But we also have a really deep commitment to democracy and to the free flow of information, the ability to access ideas and to consider, refute, debate, disagree with the ideas of other people. But we also feel very strongly that can't happen in an environment in which information and the ecosystem for it is so polluted with falsehoods. And that is where we are today. All of us knows now that when we are checking our phones, when we're getting information from friends and from family, we are asking ourselves, is this trustworthy? And then we're asking ourselves, should we do anything about that? Should we try to debunk, the myths or the falsehoods that are flooding us every day? I think it's also even if you individually are a careful news consumer, considering where the veracity of some claims are made, you're nonetheless surrounded by people that you know who are saying things to you over, dinner parties, over phone conversations with family members, with friends, where you're unsure when is the right moment to tell somebody else that the information that they're talking about is false. And we are living in an environment that is increasingly flooded, as we'll talk about today, with false information. Certainly during the presidential election campaign last year, and even ongoing now, there are numerous moments where it's really difficult for any of us alone as an individual in an ocean of information to separate fact from fiction. But here at Penn, we are committed to people's rights to freedom of expression, but also committed to thinking about how we can confront the scourge of disinformation, because we know that it undermines public discourse and public trust, faith in our institutions. It heightens division and conflict, and we're seeing that now in the news almost every single day. And altogether, this is weakening the democratic compact, the systems and basic understandings that are necessary to maintain a society in which all of us feel we have the freedom to read, to learn, to write, to express, and debate, etc. In this arena, when it comes to disinformation, our focus has been on empowering information consumers, and it remains there, thinking about how we can support community leaders, educators, journalists in particular, to better understand the challenges of disinformation and to better develop and support resilience in their professional and personal networks and communities. So that is the impetus and the jumping off point for our session today. And I'm so excited to hear from the team about their work. So I'm going to pass it off now to Kurt Samsel, who will continue the introduction and talk about how we're going to structure this session today.
Thank you so much, John. I'll say a little bit about what you can expect from the next 60 minutes or so together. We're in the middle of an introduction here where we'll be sharing our key findings from our upcoming report. And next, we'll give overviews of our main activities for this work, the Trusted Messengers Initiative, as well as counter disinformation grants and webinars. And then we'll hear from two local partners before opening it up for Q&A, and then we'll close. I would like to go ahead and introduce the people you'll be hearing from today, excuse me. Michelle Beaver is an author, editor, journalist, and she serves as the leader of PEN America's Arizona chapter. For our disinformation work, Michelle served as a local organizer, building audiences for our trusted messenger trainings and facilitating those workshops. Maritza Felix is the founder and director of Conecta Arizona, a nonprofit news organization that provides information and community as well for an audience of over 100,000 people. Conecta Arizona was one of Pan America's regional grantees for this work, so you'll hear more about what they've been up to when it comes to disinformation shortly. Jonathan Friedman, as you just heard, is the CISM's managing director for U.S. Free Expression Programs, which is the department that houses our disinformation work. Henry Hicks is manager for U.S. Free Expression Programs and led the Trusted Messenger initiative to train people to talk about news and information with friends, family, and coworkers. Tim Richardson is program director for journalism and disinformation, and he supported journalists to help them develop resilience against disinformation in 2024. And I'm Kurt Samsel, Senior Program Manager for Disinformation and Community Engagement. And in this work, I managed a portfolio of regional grantees to pilot counter disinformation initiatives, and I developed a series of media literacy webinars. This briefing and the new report are focused on our community, our disinformation and community engagement program, in which we took, like John suggested, a somewhat original approach to disinformation, which is to tackle this highly distributed, this global problem by investing in regional initiatives to distribute trustworthy information, to lift up local perspectives about how disinformation affects people and communities, to develop local capacity to consume information critically, and to address falsehoods effectively. We work to support the information environment in specific communities and provide learning experiences to be broadly shared within each community, with a focus on three rapidly growing diverse metro areas where PEN America has regional chapters. Those are Miami, the Dallas-Fort Worth region in Texas, and Phoenix. We'll say more, of course, about what we did and what our outcomes were as we go on. Today's conversation is based on this new report about our disinformation and community engagement work entitled Exploring How to Build Community-Level Resilience Against Disinformation. This report was shared under embargo with journalists this past Monday, the 24th of March, and this Friday we'll be publishing it for the general public on our website. And the purpose of the report is to share some of the counter-disinformation activities that we worked on in this program, talk about what those outcomes were from those activities, and point toward the future of work like this. In a world of disinformation resilience, a big world really, this report and the work that it reflects are distinctive in that, first of all, these are all counter disinformation initiatives that focus on regional, local, and community level impact. And second of all, they're all activities that focus not on limiting communication or the reach of communication or speech, but instead empowering audiences and messengers. And we want to be clear at the outset in sharing our key findings. We really learned a lot doing this work, and those learnings are covered in the report in a lot of detail. So these key findings really capture our highest level takeaways, and there are four. First, our pilot projects using trusted messengers to build community resilience to disinformation showed potential, and we feel the theory of change behind this trusted messenger work merits additional investment. Second, on a general level, although much of this work focused on community level impact, we want to affirm that both local and national approaches have value when it comes to addressing disinformation. We're going to end up talking a lot about community work, but that's not necessarily meant to imply that it's better than national approaches. People who want to address disinformation should consider whether a national or a local approach is the best fit, depending on their goals. Third up, it's clear to us who have worked in the area of disinformation that it's intertwined with so many other social challenges, including things like trust, polarization, conflict between people, mental health, and so on. And for this reason, I think it's really important to not only, not imagine disinformation in isolation from these other issues. Now, that doesn't mean that counter disinformation programs need to kind of do all these things at once. It just means that you need an awareness that when you're looking at disinformation and its effects, you're seeing ultimately a lot more than just a false piece of information that needs a quick fact check and then the job is done. In a similar vein, although notions of truthfulness and factuality are central to counter disinformation work, they're oftentimes the foundation of the work we're doing. It became clear to us that these categories are just not as objective and simple, straightforward, and universal as you might initially assume. That's not to say that facts are whatever you want them to be, but it's coming out of a recognition that truth and factuality are things really that need to be determined. And those processes of determination are shaped by things like power, culture, bias, and so on. That's it in terms of the key findings. And with those key findings out of the way, I'm going to hand things over to my colleague Henry, who will describe the work that he led in the Trusted Messengers Initiative.
All right. Thank you so much, Kurt. And thank you everyone for joining. I know it's a very, very busy time, so very grateful for everyone for joining the call today. Like Kurt said, I'm Henry Hicks. I am a manager for Penn's U.S. Free Expression programs, working on our disinformation and community engagement team. Over the last year or so, I've had the privilege of leading our Trusted Messenger initiative, and I'm really excited to share our findings with you all. So when we began this work, we were looking for a way in. Disinformation can be big and broad in terms of an issue for us to address. So we started with what we knew. And what we knew was that public trust in democratic institutions and journalism have been declining. But what data has also shown is that despite polarization, people trust in one another, specifically in their friends, their family, people close to them. That has remained resilient. And so looking ahead to the election, as we did this work during an election year primarily, particularly one where folks were anticipating political conversations to be especially tense, many organizations were already doing work at the local level in these 3 target cities to reach and engage voters. And they had an interest in pairing disinformation work with that. So we began to ask ourselves, how could we at Penn leverage interpersonal trust at the local level to involve and empower communities in this fight? Next slide. Thank you. So the notion that trusted messengers could be a good approach to counter disinformation work isn't exactly a new one. It's been put forward by the Union of Concerned Scientists, Indivisible, and a number of other groups working on this issue. Even further, grassroots organizers have always taken advantage of what infrastructure of trust exists in communities. In a disinformation context, however, trusted messenger has oftentimes meant community leaders, so local elected officials, faith leaders, etc. But given the data that we had on trust in friends and family, and in absence of movement coming from tech platforms and Congress, the question then became, what if we could leverage the trust that exists between community members, so anybody, everybody, you and me, to mobilize folks in a direction of better information consumption. Keeping in mind that mobilization is difficult here in this context. It's complicated. We're not pushing people to go to the polls. We're not pushing people to vote this way or that way on a particular issue. And so, how do we do organizing in a disinformation context? We ended up drawing from a practice known as relational organizing, which is often used on electoral campaigns. So for those of you that may not be familiar, relational is an organizing practice centered around facilitating conversations between friends, family, neighbors, coworkers, instead of prioritizing door knocking, phone banking, or outreach to strangers. It's about using existing relationships in order to mobilize voters. So we decided to mobilize people towards an action of pushing someone in their personal network to broaden their news diet as a strategy for protecting yourself against disinformation narratives. first thing that we did once we decided on, this is our plan, this is what we're going to do, is we brought local voices onto our team. So we hired organizers based in each city as our boots on the ground. They helped us with a number of things, so notably cultivating partnerships with local organizations. We held convenings in each city with community members to help steer us, answering questions like what part of your city would benefit most from this work, what spaces have been friendly to this sort of work, and what spaces have been, hostile in some cases. But most importantly, what do people in your city care about? We approached this program through a really broad lens of combating disinformation in a way that was not issue specific, but keeping in mind that each of these cities and the folks that live in them have specific interests and concerns that are, both national but are also locally focused. Our work in Dallas was always going to look different from our work in Miami or in Phoenix, and vice versa because of this fact. So community partnerships and the perspectives of our local organizers were critical to the success of our program. While we did not get into the weeds on particular issues, each workshop, training, conversation that we had was shaped by local context. In Texas, we talked a lot about voting rights and voting access. In Florida, we talked a lot about disinformation targeting educators and teachers. In Phoenix, climate change was an issue that came up, often. And so, this was the local focus, the local context that we were operating within that steered our work. We held 23 total workshops to cultivate a network of trusted messengers. These workshops drew librarians, journalists, union members, educators, organizers, senior students, faith leaders, business owners, kind of you name it. We reached kind of anybody and everybody in these different cities. Our partnerships with community groups and local organizations were key as we did our best to go after existing spaces where people are already looking for information or for support in their own civic and political engagement. We held our workshops at or in partnership with community colleges, public libraries, NAACP chapters, high schools, bookstores, neighborhood groups, houses of worship, and more. But what did our workshops involve? So they were broken into 4 key sections. The first of which was a Disinformation 101 training. So that's, what is disinformation? How does it spread? What makes a person vulnerable? This foundational level information was really important because much of our audience, the folks that were coming to this workshop, were new to this issue. They came because they cared about issues that were impacting them in their community or issues that they were thinking about going into the election. We then entered into a large group exercise, kind of as the second part of the workshop, where we asked everyone to sit and think and identify someone in their personal network, be it a friend, family member, coworker, who might be vulnerable to the spread of disinformation based on what they had just previously learned. And if they were comfortable, we asked them to share out with the group about the person that they identified, as well as their fears for engaging them. We heard a lot of really heartbreaking stories, actually. Families that were broken apart by COVID vaccine disinformation, friend groups that were severed based on election disinformation, or teachers targeted by their neighbors based on disinformation about what's going on in classrooms. And from there, we entered into a person-to-person conversation training. So this was kind of the centerpiece of the workshop itself. We went into prompts to consider before you go into a conversation with this person that you've just identified. We went through what to do and how to approach talking to this person while you're in the conversation, how to deal with conflict if you run into it, as well as some tangible action items to propose and how to follow up, understanding that you're not going to change someone's mind in one conversation, but we're training you to have the first of what will hopefully be many conversations over a period of time. The idea here was that we wanted people to be as prepared as possible to have conversations, not just with this one person about news consumption, but really about anybody that they chose about any issue affected by disinformation. The idea here was we wanted to really give people tools to empower them as information consumers. And kind of lastly, we then broke out into pairs to do role play exercises and practicing these conversations. We heard that this was attendees' favorite part a number of times. It was definitely, awkward at first, but it was helpful in a number of ways. So one was helping people get in the head of their friend or family member to see why they landed on a particular news source. For example, we had a number of people that wanted to talk to their children about disinformation, about news consumption, keeping in mind that young people, most often don't go to cable for their news. And so that creates a bit of distinction in terms of, or a bit of difference in terms of where different people are getting their news from. But I think the most important part of the role play exercise really was just helping people get comfortable and easing their nerves a little bit. I think being a little silly and, giving your best Viola Davis, Meryl Streep performance, as you're pretending to have these conversations, just really kind of helped you push through some of the awkwardness and the discomfort about talking about these issues with people. And then we sent them out. We gave them a couple resources. We gave them a conversation guide co-authored with a local partner, a guide on healthy news consumption and what a diverse news diet looks like, as well as pointing people to local resources like public libraries, local newsrooms, that sorts of thing. And we were able to train 501 people by the end of this program. As for impact measurement, we decided to track our trusted messengers' self-reported sense of empowerment as opposed to behavioral change on the person that they intervened upon. We surveyed our trusted messengers 3 times over the course of their involvement in the work. And as you can see kind of on the slide, before the training, folks came in at about an average of 6.31 in terms of how confident they felt going into conversations on a scale from 1 to 10. After the training, they, most on average were at a 8.18, and then about 2 weeks following the training, the average was 7.26. So confidence among trusted messengers rose and remained elevated. It may have dropped some a couple weeks out, but remained higher than before. And we estimate that our initiative prompted roughly 1,300 conversations about disinformation and news consumption for the duration of the initiative. We heard all sorts of stories from our trusted messengers on the impact that our workshops had and the way that they were able to utilize our training. You'll find a handful of them in our report on Friday when it releases, but just a few include, we had a trusted messenger who invited their person to come watch the presidential debate with them. They consumed the debate together, and then afterwards they ended up going back and forth with the different sources of news that they individually tend to consume to compare and contrast what are they hearing as a way to create some sense of balance and help them think a bit about what might be true versus what might not be. We have teachers that we trained who added navigating mis and disinformation as a new curricular point in teaching their students how to conduct research. And given that it was an election year, we had people that were better equipped for debunking false information while canvassing or door knocking for candidates or knocking doors on any particular issue. So overall, we were able to effectively provide folks in these key cities with new strategies for engaging with those close to them about disinformation, news consumption, and any other issue important to them. It was an experiment, and it's our belief that more exploration for this approach to community engagement and counter disinformation work is warranted based on our results. Our recommendation includes our report includes recommendations for scaling this work. But for now, what we do know is there's a hunger for this type of education and empowerment work, particularly when done to build stronger bridges within communities and when done outside of election years. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Kurt to detail some of our additional efforts to support communities.
Great, thank you for that overview, Henry. I'm going to talk a little bit about the different directions that we went in with this program. We did a few different things. We did a few different initiatives in different areas. And most of the work that was going on was led by us at PEN America. But we also wanted to ensure that people and organizations that were based in our 3 cities were leading some of the work. And grants were a really good way to achieve that. So why did we make subgrants a part of this programming? As a national organization that wanted to be able to make a local impact in these 3 cities, we knew that we wanted to work with and through local organizations, because simply we believe local people will be best positioned to achieve some of the results that we wanted to see from the work. And we gravitated toward grants specifically because we felt like these organizations already had a lot of the knowledge of the regions, the cultural sensitivity, the language skills, the existing positions of trust that were so important with the audiences. And so the support that would be most helpful was simply money. It was simply the ability to scale and deepen the impact of their work, as they are, for the most part, small journalism nonprofit organizations. So grants allowed us to have an impact in these communities, ultimately that would have been impossible for us to achieve on our own. And then we amplified the work of these organizations for the benefit of other folks working in these areas. So the first organization I want to say a little bit about is Fact Check Auto. This is a nonprofit that provides Spanish language journalism, fact-checking work, media literacy resources for Latino and Hispanic communities in the US. The Fact Check Auto team is international, actually, and it produces work for a national audience. But we chose them for the Miami region in terms of focusing in that area because they have a big presence there. Fact Check Auto did so much great work under our grant that we simply cannot name it all, but I'll just mention a few highlights. One is Fact Challenge. This is a media literacy course that they launched in WhatsApp in the summer of 2024. And the way that this works is you sign up for the course, and over 7 days, you receive these short messages that have different educational lessons about how disinformation works or interactive challenges to kind of test your skills in terms of detecting and debunking information. And since it launched, over 260 people have enrolled in Fact Challenge. And it was actually recognized by the Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas at University of Texas as one of the 10 groundbreaking news projects that made an impact in Latin America in 2024. In addition, on election night in November, the Fact Check Auto team and some of its partners provided over 7 hours of live streamed fact checking and results reporting in Spanish. And they also provided a Spanish language guide for identifying AI generated material that actually we published on the PEN America website. Next up is the Texas Tribune, which we selected to do work in the Dallas and Fort Worth area. The Tribune is a nonprofit news organization that was founded in 2009 and has a history of innovative efforts to provide trustworthy information about voting to communities, especially those who might face barriers to civic participation. So with our support, the Tribune basically just did that in a bigger and more expansive way than ever before, using new platforms. For instance, they used a text messaging platform to send 21 bulk messages and alerts about voting, things like heads up about voter registration deadlines to over 1,200 recipients. They created not just a conventional voter guide, which they've done for some number of years, but also a set of specialized guides for young voters, for people voting by mail, for people with disabilities. And those ultimately reached over 120,000 people. They also experimented with distributing paper voting information through community organizations, and they shared 3,500 copies of those. And these are all just incredible ways to get trustworthy information about voting to people where they already are. And of course, this is one of the best models for offsetting the influence of untrustworthy, unreliable, not truthful information, is to be really proactive and thoughtful about providing trustworthy information. And the Tribune effectively did that. And last but not least is Connect Arizona, our grantee for Phoenix. Connect Arizona is a nonprofit news organization that provides information, but also spaces for community, spaces for dialogue, for an audience of over 100,000 people in Arizona as well as Mexico. Its trademark surface is its cafecitos. These are casual conversations over coffee that take place every weekday on WhatsApp, allowing community members to hash out, discuss, debate topics of interest in a friendly community setting. And with our support, Connect Arizona ensured that at least once a week, those cafecitos would feature a subject matter expert to whom the audience can ask questions in a trusted and candid setting. And the speakers covered topics like immigration law, healthcare, education, civic engagement. Connect to Arizona also led an event in partnership with a local TV station about the Latino vote, and that featured Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, who addressed some of the different conspiracies that have emerged around Arizona's elections and its election system. These are all cases where having a local position of trust and knowledge of the communities allowed these local organizations to achieve a truly local level impact on the challenges of disinformation. Next up, we also designed and facilitated a series of instructional webinars on the topic of disinformation resilience. And you might ask why. The single biggest reason was we decided that there was a need for people to learn about this really complex topic, and that need wasn't quite being met out there. There's a lot of good content on media literacy that covers things like checking your sources, reflecting on your reactions to content, not sharing things if you're not sure that it's true, and so on. And those are great tips. I think of those kind of as like a media literacy 101 kind of thing. But we felt that today's audiences could use some deeper dives into topics related to how we consume news and information. There are other organizations making good media literacy content, of course, but their audience tends to be more like educators, activists, or other specialized groups. And we wanted to make resources for a general audience of smart and thoughtful adults. Journalists and researchers were always welcome to join these webinars, and many did, but the content really was designed to be for anybody. Now, I get that webinars might seem like kind of a strange choice for a program focused on specific regions or locations. Of course, we contemplated doing in-person programming with these, but the webinars allowed us to spotlight local perspectives by bringing in guest speakers, not just from one place, but from all of the 3 cities, while allowing learning opportunities for counterparts in the other cities, and then, of course, to broadcast learnings across the country as well. Between April 2024 and January 2025, we held 6 webinars in this series. We covered things like cognitive biases, fact-checking, how to work with journalists, and the role of influencers in our media environment. The format for these webinars was something of a hybrid. Disinformation is a complex topic, and so we wanted to help make sure that audiences could learn new concepts and terminology, get exposed to new research and data, but also get exposed to perspectives. We ultimately combined training content with panel conversation with a set of guest speakers. And in surveys, our audience told us that they appreciated getting both learnings and perspectives in this way. So people were able to learn without just getting, lecture content, and people were able to get perspectives without it just feel like, people are talking, right? Finally, I'll talk a little bit about the impact of these webinars. First of all, like I said, there were 6 of them. They featured a total of 16 expert speakers. Across the webinars, we had 517 live attendees. On YouTube, these videos of the webinars have taken on a second life, and they've accumulated over 1,600 views. We measured learnings as well as behavior change intentions. In other words, what people say they will do differently as a result of what they learned. And 89% of survey respondents indicated at least one key learning, and 71% of respondents indicated that they would do something differently based on their learnings. And when asked what content was most helpful, the training, the discussion, or both, the overwhelming majority, 78%, said both. They appreciated getting both of those kinds of content, and that really validated the value of that hybrid format. So at this time, I'll go ahead and let Tim take over, and he's going to introduce some of the local perspectives we'll be hearing from.
Well, thanks a lot, Kurt. And so, yeah, well, let's get into some of the local perspectives, particularly looking at the work that we did in Phoenix. And we'll turn this over to Maritza Felix, who is the founder of Connect to Arizona, has just done a ton of amazing work on both sides of the border to combat disinformation. So, Maritza, I guess I'd like to hear you share a little bit about Connect to Arizona, the work that you guys are doing to address disinformation, and kind of how you see the future of counter disinformation work. And you've got about 5 minutes or so if you could fill us in on what you're up to down there in Phoenix.
Awesome. Good morning, buenos días. Yes, Connect Arizona is a news you can use organization that connects transborder communities with fact-check information and accessibility to news and a good sense of humor, because everything that we do is around finding joy, reclaiming narrative, reframing the way that we see the border. And we have been doing this since 2020 when the pandemic hit. So now Connect Arizona has grown so much beyond WhatsApp. We have WhatsApp newsletters, we have a radio show, we have a podcast, we have our website, we do live events, but the heart of Connect still beats on WhatsApp. And every single afternoon from 2 to 3 p.m. Arizona time, we sit down with our community and we chat. So we're fluent in English and Spanish, emojis, and gifts. So we have been doing this for over 1,000 hours of cafecitos. So we listen, so we chat with our communities, and we can start our chat with what's happening with Sofia Vergara and who won the Oscar, and then we go to Trump, and then we go back to Biden, and that's how we do, like having a cafecito with your comadre and compadre. But doing this every single day is like going to the gym. We're exercising the muscle of conversation, of dialogue, of democracy. So sometimes those conversations are really easy. And sometimes we talk about very difficult stuff, like this 2025 has been especially challenging for our immigrant community, and we have different immigrant experiences. Last year, it was a lot of controversy about how do we talk about abortion? How do we talk about rural communities? How do we talk about our difference in political views? So we were creating those safe spaces where people could actually be exposed to different point of view and embrace a good conflict and create safe spaces where they could ask all the questions that they did. And that listening muscle that we have been developing in training, it actually paid off. So we could actually see what was going to happen on the election night and what was going to happen after, because we have been listening to those communities that have been underserved, ignored, and overlooked for so long. But the other thing is, like, we were getting to them. So we did the only town hall in Espanol in Arizona about elections. And we covered topics that was climate justice, DACA students, the Secretary of State who actually speaks Spanish was there answering questions, housing, rural communities, entrepreneurs. We try to combine the things that we identify that are more important for them to actually have the answers and perspectives that they needed to make a decision, an informed decision for November. We went to rural communities as part of this grant, and we listen and we understand that those communities are very disengaged, are not participating, and they're falling for mis and disinformation just because nobody else has put attention to those communities. So there's a lot of lessons that we get from 2024. Well, one of them, the most important one, was keep the active listening to your communities. It's not just parachuting during an election year. It is something that you need to do every single time, and to listen in topics that are not necessarily related to politics all the time, because we're building trust when we're listening about how they're doing, what are they worried about, the education of their kids, of they can afford to buy eggs anymore. So all of those things that we're thinking about, that's something how we build trust, and that's something how we're gonna keep fighting the mis and disinformation. The other thing is that we have been training community members to identify like that fake news you can see online, or those headlines they look so pretty and they like are just clickbaits. And sometimes when they fall to that disinformation is because they actually need somebody to back up their point of view. And because we're so polarized that they just want somebody to agree with them. So what we were fighting during 2024 with the help of PEN America was to fight that polarization that actually leads to this and disinformation. And then we were like trying to combat the political violence. That was something that we know as immigrant communities that we have always faced. But I think 2024 was a most challenging year. And looking back now, I think we were just prepping for this 2025. That I think we're facing even bigger challenges in our communities. But everything starts and ends with the listening. And then just trying to find joy in journalism and in conversations with our communities, knowing that we are part of them. So it's never us versus them, it's always we. And that's how we do things in Connect Arizona.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Before I turn it over to Michelle, I just want to say that if anyone has any questions for our panelists, you can please put them in the chat and we will answer those here shortly. But so Michelle, you were really in the trenches in Phoenix. I mean, you led our community workshops down there. And I'm just wondering if you could share your experiences working on disinformation and in the Phoenix area, what you learned and what you see as the future for people and for organizations that are addressing disinformation in your area.
Sure. Well, thank you, Tim. I mean, overall, I loved my experience of helping combat disinformation in Phoenix. And because, as you all know, Phoenix was an epicenter of election misinformation. And so I really welcomed getting to be part of a solution to help combat that. Because of all the issues facing Phoenix, one of my greatest concerns is disinformation, because how can we be expected to solve any problems here or anywhere for that matter if we can't even agree on basic facts? So I've been pessimistic about this topic for years, but I felt powerless to really address it. So it was actually a great relief to have an opportunity to help mitigate this problem. The truth is, I'm still very pessimistic about disinformation. But every time I did a workshop, I actually felt a lot better, a lot better. So in every workshop, I asked the question, if we don't fight disinformation, who will? And in every group, most of the attendees did end up reporting that they felt empowered to do their part. And it was really awesome to hear their feedback and to see their enthusiasm. Again, it gave me some hope. So yes, people did feel nervous to share our message of diversifying news diets, but that's normal. It's normal to feel nervous. I still feel nervous every time I have one of these conversations. So I try to help everyone see that feeling nervous is natural and that we can work through it. And it means that you care, and that's a good thing. So in each of the workshops, the attendees were super passionate talking about people in their lives who they wanted to share our messaging with. You know, for instance, that relative or that friend or that neighbor who's fallen into a rabbit hole of disinformation or into an echo chamber. And, you know, there was so much passion being discussed there that, you know, you'd start to form pictures of like, who is this dad or this sister or whoever this person's talking about? And to see how much, you know, the person at the workshop cared about this relationship. So it made it really interesting to hear later on how those conversations the attendees had ended up going. And I'm still hearing about how those conversations are going. It's interesting. It's really interesting. So something that I learned through the workshops is that there's a great many people at all levels of society who do want to help fight disinformation. I trained people as young as 14 all the way up to age 85 from many walks of life. And what almost all of them had in common is that they are losing relationships with people they love because they can't agree on basic facts. I learned that far too many of us have absolutely no idea how to talk with people we like or love about disinformation. So as far as the future for people and organizations who are trying to address disinformation, I think the future is to not give up. There are times I do feel like, man, is this all just pointless? But it's when I step into the trenches by doing these workshops and by having these conversations that I see that person by person and conversation by conversation, the fight against disinformation does have hope.
Thank you very much. And if anyone has any questions, if you could put them in the Q&A, we will answer them. But in the meantime, Henry, I'm going to go to you. You led our Trusted Messenger initiative across the 3 cities. You trained numerous people in this to do this sort of work and have these difficult conversations. I'm just looking back at you shared a remark from one of the trainees, Jacqueline, in just now, and that appears in our report this week. But you also had 3 case studies as well. Can you just share a little bit more about those cases, their experience, and some of those things that you learned?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, we have 3 case studies in the report. We ended up doing not a total of 9 case study interviews, so we have a lot to pull from. You know, as Michelle mentioned, I think that there's a lot of range actually in the people that we trained and the experiences that they had. We have one case study who attended multiple workshops. We had a workshop that was tailored for seniors, and we also had one that was at a Black-owned bookstore. One of our case studies, she went to both of those workshops. And a lot of what she talks about in her case study is actually the resources that we gave her and about how she was able to pull from those over a period of weeks into months, directing people to our guidebook very specifically. So what I think I learned kind of from that case study in particular is that the tools that we gave people did not just kind of remain within them. They're sharing those same tools out with other people who can take them and apply them in their own lives as well. So we trained about 500 people, but I think that the number of people that have been affected by this work and have benefited from the strategies, not necessarily being the ones that have been intervened upon, but who have also undergone some sort of learning and become messengers in their own networks, is likely higher than that.
And we have a question from Tom Schroeder focused on, I believe, on the trusted messenger work. So I think this could go to Henry or Michelle, but he's asking, can you identify the overall goal of your trainings and workshops to help others recognize objective versus subjective, and then, intentionally seek, being able to seek alternative sources of news? I don't know which one of you might want to take a stab at that one.
Well, how about I start and then maybe Henry can take over. And one of the main purposes of the workshop is to teach people how to diversify their news diet and then how to get their loved ones to diversify their news diet.
Yep, absolutely. I think that one, just a more specific example, because we go into a bit about what a diverse news diet looks like and how that can be national news and also local news. It doesn't necessarily mean left to right, although it can. But one example in particular is when the disinformation narrative about Springfield, the Haitian immigrants eating cats and dogs, that narrative came up. We heard a lot about that, I would say, at a number of the workshops that we did then. And one thing we were able to point people towards was a publication like the Haitian Times, which is one that our journalism team at Penn has worked with. But I bring that up to say, we've pointed people in the direction of identity-based publications as well. So if you're thinking a bit about who you're hearing about in the news and disinformation narratives that are targeting specific communities, what news sources can you then take in that don't just cover the issue of disinformation, but actually uplift and elevate the perspectives of people at the center of those disinformation narratives.
Thank you. And Kurt, you managed 3 of the sub-grantees working on these local organizations that are working on disinformation. 2 of those, Fact Check Auto and Connect Arizona. Of course, we just heard from Maritza a few minutes ago, but 2 of those focused on Spanish language, Spanish speakers. Could you just talk a little bit about why was there that focus on Spanish language initiatives with this program?
Sure, Tim. Thanks for that question. And actually, the Texas Tribune also did some work in Spanish to get some of that trustworthy information about voting processes in Texas to Spanish speakers. So in a way, Spanish was a big part of all 3 of them. And, people might wonder with that emphasis on Spanish, is that because there is more disinformation in Spanish, or is that because Spanish speakers have, special vulnerabilities to false information? And I don't think that those things are so much the case, but there are other factors that I think are big when you're thinking about Spanish speakers and disinformation. So first of all, just to make an obvious, perhaps, point here, Spanish is the second most commonly spoken language in the United States. So we're talking about, many, many millions of people who can benefit from Spanish language initiatives. I think the single biggest reason why Spanish is important to invest in is because one of the key ways that people are able to offset the influence of disinformation is by seeking better information, basically, to put it really simply. When people come across claims, allegations, accounts that are perhaps dubious or maybe not trustworthy, it's a really common thing that people check around. They do impromptu fact checks of their own. They compare a claim that they see that might be provocative or questionable against other information that exists. And the situation is that there's just less of that information in Spanish that allows people to do that checking work. And the other factor that I think is significant to keep in mind is that we do have pretty clear data indicating that Spanish speakers simply use social media platforms and messaging platforms more commonly than English speakers. And the reason why that's significant is because that means that they're relying relatively more heavily on sources of information or platforms for receiving information where there isn't vetting, where there isn't kind of confirmation of what is accurate, where there isn't fact checking. And so that makes it extra important for there to be really quality information in language for those Spanish speakers. And Maritza, I'd be curious to hear if you want to add anything to that based on your substantial experience.
Yeah, I was actually writing on the chat that it is very important for us as Hispanics, as Latinos, as immigrants, as non-English, as our first language in the US, to have that human connection, not just always like sending something and having a bot respond to us and answer our questions because we don't trust that. For us, it's like about relationship and trusting. So the human connection, the bicultural context, to understand that we always have one feet over here and then we're still are hearing things from our countries of origin, and how information goes back and forward, because sometimes community members, they do believe something, but then they call home and their parents tell them something different, so they plant that seed in their mind. So understanding how those relationship goes and the bicultural context is very important. And then language accessibility is another thing. It's like we were like AI was a big factor last year, and there was a lot of content that it was created by AI and it was translated by AI, and it was a lack of connection with our communities, but at the same time it was spreading very easily and really fast. So community members didn't know what to trust and what not. So when they had a human behind this effort saying it's like, okay, you can trust this or not, we fact checked this but we did not this, they felt safer. And having the opportunity to have a conversation, like a grown-up conversation, was a big step. The challenge was, how do we embrace those conversations from a place of curiosity and not from conflict? And that's something that we developed for the past year, like actually exercising that muscle of listening to the community, so we can listen and they can listen, and then we can actually have a conversation.
Thank you for that. And we've all seen, I'll kind of throw this open to anyone, whoever wants to grab this question, but we've seen a pretty substantial shift in the disinformation landscape in recent years, both we're talking politically, both content moderation at the social platforms and how they handle disinformation and a pullback from that. What changes do you see in the landscape for information, for news, and for fighting disinformation, and I guess how might that continue to evolve in the future?
For me, I think one of the solutions is just like the human contact and experience and in person. That's something that we realize that is very needed and community are craving, to actually sit down in person and analog, because they don't trust now the tech industry anymore. So there's a lot of things that we can actually have if we go back to the basis of having just regular conversations, and then becoming trusted messengers of our communities and multiplying that effect. So because, for example, with us, Latinas moms are very, very important. So we as moms, we are the head of the family, and people listen to us whether they like it or not, because that's how we rule. But the thing is, like, if we can if we can train those moms to be like the trusted messenger of their family, they will do it organically in person in the kitchen. And that'll be fantastic. So we're going to be preventing a lot of things, and we're going to be embracing that connection that we need to actually like shield ourselves from mis and disinformation.
Thank you so much. And Tom, I see your comment in the chat. I will message you after this is over, and I would love to have a discussion with you about that. But so with that, I would just say, thank you all. I just want to give a big thanks again to Kurt, to Henry, to Maritza, to Michelle, and all of you for just sharing your important work with us. So PEN America began this community-based disinformation resilience work because this is not just an abstract threat, but it's a force that undermines trust, it deepens division, it weakens communities, and harms democracy. Countering disinformation isn't just about fact-checking or debunking falsehoods, and as we discovered over the past year, it requires building resilience at the community level and equipping our friends and our neighbors with tools to navigate an information landscape that is continuing to evolve. In the face of those uncertainties, we set out to explore a new approach, one that tackled disinformation not just as a national problem, but as a community challenge. And in today's political environment, disinformation has evolved into a deliberate tool used to justify policies, undermine opposition, and stoke divisions. In an era where even authoritative institutions can become sources of misleading claims, our communities must be prepared to distinguish truth from manipulation, and it really does take all of us. But yet, despite that uncertainty, some of the very efforts designed to protect public discourse are being defunded, discredited, or outright shut down. That's why we can't back down, and it's why we set out to empower citizens and communities. But our research does make one thing clear, that combating disinformation requires investment in community resilience. That means supporting trusted local voices, and it means pushing back against efforts to delegitimize counter-disinformation work. As a society, we must continue to help our friends, our family members, and our neighbors to understand what information is truthful, what sources of news are accurate, and what's being created by bad actors intent on doing us harm. At PEN America, we're hopeful that policymakers, funders, journalists, educators, and everyday citizens, all of us, will join this effort to strengthen communities against the forces that seek to divide us. Disinformation resilience isn't just an option, but for a healthy democracy, it's a necessity. And with that, I would just say thank you all very much for joining us. And yeah, the next steps, we will release the report publicly on Friday at 9 a.m. And you all will receive a video. Everyone who signed up will get a recording of this also on Friday. Yes, any questions, contact anyone here or media@pen.org, and we can certainly help you out. And with that, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us, folks.